pray. Healer of our every ill, light of each tomorrow, give us peace beyond our fear and hope beyond our sorrow. Amen. Elijah shows compassion for this woman. He has great compassion for her, to the point of having this boy be brought up to his room, laying his body across him 3 times. We see shared humanity in this story of Elijah and the widow and her son. The psalmist, we hear the psalmist declare, after much suffering, after horrible grief, after great loss, you have turned my wailing into dancing. We know about the shared humanity of that. All of us can probably name that point in our life, that moment, that day, that hour, that week, where that happened. Where all we knew was pain and wailing and tears, and there was that moment where it turned to dancing. That's shared humanity. Then in our gospel, Jesus restores his son to his mother, and we see the gospel right here says, and Jesus had compassion. This shared humanity. Jesus was the Son of God, but was this man who hurt deeply to see someone in so much pain. Pema Chodron writes, compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. It's about equals. As Leroy Eisminger always said, at the foot of the cross, it's level. There's no hierarchy. That's good news. Maybe for some of us who want to be on top, it doesn't sound like good news, but it's good news that we are so close to each other because of our shared humanity. I think all the big issues of the day, all of the big problems of the world, like poverty and persecution and discrimination and hunger and people dominating over others and illness and grief, our starting place is our shared humanity, is the ability to say, I know my own darkness, and I will together be in your suffering with you. We know this. We know the greatest times in our own lives, in those moments of suffering, have been when someone came along with us and entered into it. Our darkness seemed too deep for anyone, and all of a sudden someone was with us. And the darkness didn't scare them, and in that we experienced God's presence. We experienced Christ. One of our problems is we spend so much time worrying about what others think about us. We're so sure when we walk into a room, everyone's noticing our weight, or our height, or our hair, or our clothes. We spend so much time worrying about what the neighbors think of us. Some psychologists estimate we spend 60 to 90% of our time worrying about what others think about us. Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, has a new book called Big Magic. The subtitle is Creative Living Beyond Fear. She tells about meeting a woman who at the time was in her 70s who helped her get perspective on this. The woman said to her, we all spend our 20s and 30s trying so hard to be perfect because we're so worried about what people think of us. Then we get into our 40s and 50s and we finally start to be free because we decide we don't really care what anyone thinks of us. But you won't be completely free until you reach 60 or 70 when you finally realize the liberating truth, nobody was ever watching you anyhow. This is liberation. And what if instead of worrying what are people thinking about me, we walk in and say everyone in this room is broken and wounded, and not as judgment, but as a liberating truth. And in that we find freedom. Freedom to look beyond our own nose, freedom to see the hurt in someone else's eyes, the fear, the grief, and enter into that with them. We experience God in these moments of shared humanity. We are called to be these compassionate people who in a relationship we are equals. And only when we own our own darkness can we be present in the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. A friend was telling that in her life in Chicago, there's a group of women who over the years, many of them have experienced layoffs with the rise and fall of the economy. And they made a commitment when the first one was laid off one would ever walk out of the building alone when their last day of work. And in 30 years, nobody ever has. This friend who was telling the story was fortunate she'd never had this problem. She'd never had to put out the plea, "Can someone be with me?" until last month. And on Thursday, a friend walked her out the door. That's shared humanity. These people had the worst day of their life, being laid off, having to walk out of that building, their identity, all their hard work, feeling like it was discounted, and there was that friend beside them, sharing in that pain, knowing what it was like to have been laid off and carry that box of all that you have to show for your 20 years together. Shared humanity. Frederick Buechner wrote, "You do not need to understand healing to be healed or know anything about blessing to be blessed." We know this to be true. We know the stories of healing, and there's beautiful blessings out there that we know very well. And they are just stories until we need healing and someone walks into that with us, or until someone blesses us when we didn't ask for it or expect it. We don't have to know it in the moment, but oh, was our life forever changed that someone entered into that, even when we didn't know we needed it. A family was sharing a story recently that they gave me permission to share. Over 60 years ago, the family had to move back to Minnesota after not making it in a business in South Dakota. They found a farm in central Minnesota to rent. It included a small lake. And in their busyness of getting moved in and getting the horses settled, they'd met the neighbor across the road. Then they were horrified when they saw the horses had wandered down by the lake, and there's a clay gumbo mixture that's like quicksand. And the horses were sinking and panicking, and they didn't know what to do, and they didn't have enough family members to rescue these horses. So one of them went to the neighbors and asked, "Can you come help us?" They ran back to try to save the horses, and when they looked up, they couldn't see the end of the line of neighbors coming to help. Everyone that day dropped everything they were doing. Busy farm people who had probably 100 things to do that day dropped everything to go help a neighbor they hadn't even met yet to save their horses. The horses were saved that day. That's shared humanity. That's what it means to be a child of God, is to not to say, "I lord it over you," or "at least I'm not as bad as that," but instead to enter into each other's suffering, to be compassionate, to suffer together, and to say, in this, God is surely present. We are Lutherans, and we believe in the theology of the cross, that we meet God, yes, in those wonderful moments of baptism and graduation and anniversaries and celebration, and we meet God in our suffering. And we know it most tangibly through another human being who can be God's eyes or voice or hands in that moment. Many of you maybe saw the movie Schindler's List. In that, it's quoted from the Talmud, "He who saves one life saves the entire world." Now, at first that sounds presumptuous, and yet there again we know it to be true. It makes a huge difference in our life, and then it's just the ripple effect. The man who saves one person saves the world. Kyle, Alberti, Julie Thomas, and myself were at Synod Assembly Friday and yesterday. And I was so moved by, and I'm not always moved if you know my view on Synod Assembly, I'm not always moved, but the shared humanity. To hear Pastor Bob Schell talk about his ministry at St. Dismas and stories of shared humanity with people who are in for the rest of their life, and the incredible gift they have in knowing they are not alone when many of you go to worship with them, when they look out for each other, when they call each other to accountability. Or Jeanette McCormick, who's at Pebble DDOs, who's now her term there is done in October, and she's raised up strong leaders and hoping people like us can go and help continue that ministry. Or Pastor Abraham from the First African Congregation, who talked about how it's been a struggle. They've been worshiping together so long, and yet they feel like they have become a part of the community finally. And it's because of many of us who have reached out to them. Or Rebel Hurd, who's from Peace, who now has started a church. It's called Church on the Street. That's where the congregation meets. She goes downtown and meets with people and listens to their stories. She said 90% of her day is just listening to people, how they came to be on the street. And they're going to have their first worship service outdoors in about a month. Her wounded head, who shared what it's like to be a Native American growing up in South Dakota and still became a Lutheran pastor. This is our shared humanity. And we are stronger in those broken places. When we say, I look you in the eye and I see that you two are made in the image of God. And we become the people of God who say, I am with you and I am for you. It's an assembly. Gary Westgard was the chaplain. If you know Gary Westgard, just to be in his presence is pure gift. He's called the Prairie Poet, and he shared poems throughout the assembly. The first day he shared one that wasn't written by him, and at first I was horribly disappointed to say, here's the author, but here's the one he shared by Ronald Wallace. It's called Blessings. Blessings occur. Some days I find myself putting my foot in the same stream twice, leading a horse to water and making him drink. I have a clue. I can see the forest for the trees. All around me, people are making silk purses out of sow's ears, getting blood from turnips, building Rome in a day. There's a business like show business. There is something new under the sun. Some days, misery no longer loves company. There's rest for the weary. There's turning back. There are guarantees. I can be serious. I can mean that. You can quite put your finger on it. Some days I know I'm long for this world. I can go home again. And when I go, I can take it with me. Blessings to you as we share compassion, as we enter into this shared humanity of blessings. Amen. Let us pray. Holy God, we give you thanks for calling us to be your people. We give you thanks that at the foot of the cross, it's level. And in that level place, we find our shared humanity. Give us joy in the journey. Give us confidence to proclaim and look for light. We pray this in Jesus' holy name.